You know, when we think of Venus, we usually picture Earth's evil twin, right? A fiery, poisonous world where nothing could possibly survive. But what if that's not the whole story? What if, way back during the Cold War, Soviet scientists found something on its surface, something they decided to keep secret? Well, today, we're going to peel back those layers of secrecy and see what might really be hiding beneath the clouds of our sister planet.
Because this is the central question that's been hanging around for decades. The Soviet Union, they poured everything into their Venus program, more missions than all other countries put together. And some of those missions sent back some really shocking data. And then, poof, the whole program just went quiet. So what did they actually find?
And here's the crazy thing about Venus. On the one hand, it's our closest neighbor, almost the exact same size and gravity as Earth, a true sister planet. But on the other hand, it's a complete vision of hell. The surface is so hot it could literally melt lead. The atmospheric pressure is 90 times what we feel here, and oh yeah, it rains sulfuric acid. You wouldn't last a second. So you have to ask, why on earth would the Soviets become so obsessed with this place? Well, back in the 60s, some of the first radar scans hinted at something amazing. They saw what looked like mountain ranges, maybe even ancient riverbeds. Some scientists were convinced Venus once had oceans. If there was ever life anywhere else in our backyard, Venus was the #1 suspect.
And that spark of hope launched the massive Venera program. For 20 years, they threw everything they had at Venus. A lot of the early missions failed. They exploded, they melted, they lost contact, but they just kept going. Finally, in 1970, Venera 7 made history, the first successful landing on another planet. And then, by 1982, they were getting color photos back. And that's when things got really, really weird.
Okay, so this is where the story takes a pretty sharp turn. The images and data that came back from these final landers, they contained some things that were, let's say, deeply unsettling. These weren't just pictures of a dead, rocky landscape. They were pictures that raised questions the Soviets clearly weren't ready to answer. Even in the early black and white photos, engineers started noticing something that just didn't look right. In a world shaped by heat and pressure, you expect rounded, eroded rocks. But these images showed rocks with sharp edges, really angular shapes, an unnatural kind of symmetry. It was the very first clue that maybe Venus wasn't as dead as everyone thought. But the color photos from Venera 13 and 14, that's what took this whole mystery to another level. Scattered amongst the orange rocks were these anomalies. There were objects with clear geometric shapes. There were structures that kind of looked like mushroom caps. And then there was the most famous one, an object that looked like a segmented, almost scorpion-like creature.
And then came the bombshell. Leonid Kazantzakis, one of the top scientists on the project, came forward with an incredible claim. He had analyzed a sequence of photos taken minutes apart and declared that some of these strange objects, they seemed to move. They appeared to change their position. Suddenly, this wasn't just about weird-looking rocks. This was about potential activity.
Now, in the West, the scientific community had a pretty logical explanation for all this. Camera glitches, maybe a lens cap fell off, or just distortion from the insane heat. And honestly, that makes sense. But the Soviet response? That's what's so baffling. Instead of defending their findings, they just went silent. The Venus missions were quietly defunded, and the archives were sealed. No explanation, no debate, nothing. You've got to remember the context here. This was the absolute height of the Cold War. Any major scientific discovery wasn't just about science. It was a potential weapon, a strategic advantage, or even a threat. The sudden radio silence makes you wonder if what they found on Venus was no longer a scientific question, but a matter of national security. And there's some evidence to support this idea. Over the years, some former Soviet engineers have anonymously come forward saying they detected really weird electrical activity in Venus's atmosphere. Not just lightning, but signals that almost looked like organized patterns. And then the order came from the top. Stop analyzing those frequencies. Just like that, Venus became classified information. So, why all the secrecy? Well, there are basically three main theories. The first is pretty simple. Maybe the data was just junk and it was a national embarrassment. Or two, the findings had some kind of military use. Think about it. If a planet can change on its own, could you engineer that change? Planetary engineering would have been a top-level secret. Or there's theory number three, the most explosive one. What they found was proof of extraterrestrial life, and they decided the world just wasn't ready for it.
For decades, that's pretty much where the story ended. Venus was just a forgotten mystery. But recently, new science, stuff we can do now that they couldn't dream of then, has forced us to go back and look at those old Soviet files in a completely new light.
And this is a big one. Modern climate models from NASA now suggest that Venus probably had liquid water oceans and a comfortable mild climate for up to 2 billion years. That is way longer than complex life has been on Earth. The Soviets' original hunch that Venus was once habitable, turns out it was probably right all along.
And then, in 2020, came another shocker. Scientists detected a gas called phosphine high in the clouds of Venus. Now, here on Earth, phosphine is almost entirely produced by microbes, by life. All of a sudden, the idea of life on Venus wasn't just science fiction anymore, and those weird Soviet photos started looking a whole lot more interesting.
So what all this really means is that our own modern science is accidentally starting to back up what the Soviets might have discovered and then buried all those years ago. The possibility that some kind of life could still exist there, maybe floating in the clouds, puts their whole mysterious story into perspective. And so, Venus is still this forbidden planet, holding on to its secrets. We're left with all these lingering questions. What did those probes really see in that orange haze? Were those anomalies just glitches, or something more? And if they were real, what does it mean that the first country to find evidence of alien life might have chosen to hide it from the rest of us?
But, beyond the whole mystery of aliens, Venus is important for another reason. It's like a terrifying mirror for our own planet. It shows us exactly what happens when a greenhouse effect goes completely out of control, when a planet's delicate balance just totally, catastrophically collapses. Which really leaves us with one final, haunting thought. If a planet so much like our own could have had such a vibrant life and then die so spectacularly, is the story of Venus just some ancient history lesson about a world far away? Or is it a warning about our own future? The answer is probably still out there, waiting for us, hidden beneath those burning clouds.